All right, it is officially 10 o'clock, so we're going to get started. Welcome. I'm Samantha O'Connor. I am the Cardinal Training Specialist. This webinar is being recorded so that I will be able to share it out with those of you who need to kind of go back and review anything, as well as for those who registered but were not able to make it or are coming after the fact and would like to see what was covered. Today we'll be covering reports, and this is going to be sort of a hybrid of some of the stuff that we've done in the past, where we'll be kind of looking at a lot of basic things. So those of you who have been in reports training before, we might be covering some stuff that you're already familiar with, but I wanted to kind of go back and look at it from the context of the upgraded version of the software that we're using, because there were significant changes to reports in Evergreen 3.13, which is the version that we're on right now. And I think probably a lot of the people in this webinar have attempted to use the report since that upgrade and seen what these changes look like to various levels of success and frustration. So we're going to kind of go back over a lot of report basics within the context of these new features, as well as hopefully get into a little bit more in depth for those of you who have a higher comfort level with reports. But I also know that we have a lot of people attending today who are fairly new to the consortium or new to running reports. So I want to make sure that they're not getting lost. Please feel free to put questions in the chat as we go through if you'd like me to go into more detail on something. If you'd like to kind of clear up anything that you've attempted to try in the past that didn't work the way that I'm suggesting it's going to work when I'm showing it to you now, please feel free to get that clarification in the chat. I'm happy to dive into any kind of side questions to make sure that everybody is keeping up and on the same page. That being said, let's go ahead and get started. Today, we're going to be covering setting up reports accounts, and basically what that means is talking about creating new folders. We are going to talk a little bit about what's going on with the report, or we won't go into a great deal of depth about that. If that's something you're interested in, you can kind of go back and take a look at some of my earlier webinars where I do talk about that in more detail, but we will talk about it a little bit today. We'll be talking about the centralized reports templates. Specifically, we'll be talking about not only how to navigate those and clone them, but also how to kind of deal with some of the various issues that that have kind of come up post upgrade when cloning from that folder. Most of those have been dealt with. We don't have a ton that's still kind of causing problems actively, but there are a few things just to kind of be aware of when you're cloning from that folder or from any folder, really. We will talk in depth about the process of cloning and then editing templates during that cloning process. And we'll be talking about running reports from a template and talking a little bit about recurrence and some of the different options for setting that up. And throughout, as I said, please feel free to ask questions. I'm happy to kind of dive into other areas that aren't covered here, but this is a general plan for the day. I'm expecting the webinar to take about 2 hours. We'll take a break somewhere in the middle so you can stretch and get a drink of water and everything. But we've got a lot of ground to cover, so I wanted to make sure we had plenty of time for it. And that being said, let's start by talking about setting up your account. And primarily what I mean when I'm talking about setting up an account in the context of today's webinar is setting up folders. So those of you who have used reports in the past are probably familiar with the concept that you have to have a place to store each level of your report. And the reports are created in 3 distinct steps. That has not changed with the upgrade. The interface looks different. The folders where you're saving those are different. A little bit of what you can do and how you can navigate has changed, but the general concept of that 3-tier system and the need for folders has not changed. So let's talk a little bit about what that means. When I talk about the 3 steps or 3 tiers, I'm talking about the fact that you need a template, a report definition, and an output. So every report you run will have a template, and that is where the displays that are included in the report, so the columns and the categories of data, those are going to be chosen at the template level. It's also where the filters are set in terms of deciding what to filter on. So saying that you're going to be filtering on a date or whether something is deleted or not. Those are things that you'll set at the template level. And then you also determine how the data will display in your output within the template. So that's what we call a transform. And you'll also determine some of the aspects of how filters will actually limit data within the context of the template. That's called an operator. Then the next step is your report. This is, I usually will refer to this as something like a report definition. This is where you basically tell Evergreen how to use this template to pull the exact data you want, which means primarily you're setting the actual data for your filters. So at that template level, you said which data points you wanted to filter on. At the report level, you're actually giving a definition to those filters. So if you said in your template that you'll be filtering on circulation date, then in the report, you'll actually set the date for that filter. You'll say, January 7th, 2025. That's the date that you want for all of the circulations that you pull out in your output to have occurred on. So you're setting your filter data, and that's the main thing you're doing at the report level, but you're also naming your output. A lot of times you'll have a single template and you'll run multiple reports off of that template. So you may run the same report every month. It uses the same template every time you run it. Even if it's not set up to recur, even if you're running it manually each time, it can come off that same template each time. But if you do that, then the report that you create each time you manually set it up needs to have a unique name. So you name both the report itself and the output that will come from that report when you set up the report definition. You'll also determine where that output will be saved. So which folder that you have in your account, you'll be putting that output in. And then also, this isn't listed here, but who it will be sent to. There's an option for an email address, and I do recommend that you use that, even if you'll primarily be accessing the output via the browser. Putting that email address in is helpful because if there's an error running the report, you'll get the error message in the email, and that's where you'll get kind of the debugging information that you can send to the Cardinal team in order to figure out what went wrong. So I definitely recommend putting your email address in there. And then you can also determine if it's not being run right away, when you'd like to run it and how often, which is called recurrence. The final level of this kind of three-tier system is the output. So the template is where you kind of set up the parameters of your report. The report is where you define how those parameters will be used. And then the output is the output. It's the data that then gets pulled based on those parameters. So in your output folder, you can actually view your data. You can view it within the browser by clicking the HTML link. And then if you've chosen to have an Excel file of it, which most people do, you can also download it from there. And there's also an option to debug if something went wrong. The way that you access that has changed a little bit in the upgrade. So we'll walk through how to get the debugging information a little later today. Most people don't spend a lot of time in the output folders. Most people have the output emailed to them and they access it via that email. And that's perfectly fine if that's your preference. That's how most people do it, and there's nothing wrong with doing that. But just be aware that you can always go back to that output folder and access things that are in there. We do have a process that runs regularly that deletes old output if it's not from a recurring report and a couple other parameters, I think, then old output will be deleted. So if it is something that you need to save, download the Excel file, which most people do. As I said, I don't think very many of our staff users really go into the output folder to view their output. They usually download an Excel file from the email, but just know that it is available for you. So that is the structure of the reporter, and that has not changed in the upgrade. So this is still the way that you'll interact with the reports in this three-tier system. And just like before the upgrade, templates cannot be edited once they've been saved. So if you need to make a change, then you actually need to clone your template create a new version of that same template and then make edits within that new version and then save that and run reports off of that. Those of you who have been in a training with me before know that I recommend when you're creating a template that you add a version number to your name. That way, as you go through and make edits based on errors or strange output or just realizing that you left a column off or something like that, you can kind of keep track of what number you're on and everything. And there's no shame in going up to, template version 7.5 or whatever you need to get it right. I often make many, many versions of a template when I'm trying to figure something out. So that's perfectly fine. Any questions about this structure? All right, well, let's go ahead and talk a little bit about getting your folders set up. So those of you who had been using reports before the upgrade, the setup that you had prior to the upgrade should still be functional. You shouldn't need to do anything. Those of you who may be new to reports, this is the process for setting up your folders the first time. The first thing you'll need to do is create subfolders, and you'll need to create a subfolder in each one of these tiers. So you'll need to create a subfolder for your templates, your reports, and your output. I have had issues in the past where somebody has asked for help with a report, and I create a template for them, and they go to clone it, but they don't have anywhere to save it because they had been running reports off someone else's templates in the past, and so they'd never created a template folder. So make sure that you're always creating a folder for each one of these tiers. Regardless of how much you really end up using your own template folder, you do need to have it because that's where you'll be saving things that you clone from other accounts. And it is, of course, our best practice that you clone templates and then run the reports off of your cloned version rather than running a report off of a template owned by someone else. So you'll create your template, report, and output subfolders. And then as part of that process, you'll also determine whether or not you'll be sharing those. I often recommend that at the very least, your final versions of your reports, you have shared at your branch or if not system level. You don't have to share with all of Cardinal, but it definitely makes things easier when you need to troubleshoot and you put in a ticket if the folders are already shared. And then that also allows your colleagues to come in and clone your templates and things like that. If they need to change hands or anything like that, it just makes the process a lot smoother. So sharing, you don't have to share, but I recommend it. So let's take a look at that process. And I'm actually going to log into I may not have saved the password for this. Try this. All right, give me just one moment because it looks like I failed to save the password for the account that I created for this process. So we will do most of our work within the regular production staff client, but for this process, I'm going to go into Next and we'll do it from in there. All right. So for those of you brand new to reports, the way that you can access reports, you can click on this link here under the administration box on the splash page, or you can go under the administration menu and choose reports. We do have a simple reports option as well. We won't be covering that today. We do have some older training on that. Simple reports were not really affected by the upgrade, so you should be able to watch the older training and apply that to the simple reporter. But for the regular full reporter, we'll go into the reports option on the menu. And you'll see over here, my template report and output folders exist, but they don't have these little arrows next to them as you see in the shared folders, which means that they have no subfolders. That means that if I click on this, I don't have any options. I can't create a new template or clone anything. So before I can move forward with any of that, I do have to create those folders. So that's going to be my first step here. And to do that, I would just click on the top level folder that I want, and then I'd click this Add Top Level Template folder, and I'd give it a name. And so now you see this little arrow has appeared next to templates. If I click on that, it opens this up and you can see that I've got this subfolder of training, and I can come in here and now I have options for things I can actually do. So I can create a new template. There's not much more I can do without having anything saved to it yet, but I can create a new template, and then I can also do some work with the folder itself. I can add another level subfolder below this. So, if you wanted to have one folder for circulation and then subfolders for, counts and lists or something like that, then you can do that. You can organize this however makes sense to you. The thing I'm going to do right now is click on this button here to share folder. And I can choose my sharing setting to be either all of Cardinal, which means that anyone logged in to NC Cardinal's Evergreen will then be able to see my templates under the shared folders section over here on the left. And I do recommend that if you have something that you need help with, making sure that the template for it is saved into a folder that's shared with all of Cardinal, so that, that whoever ends up taking that ticket is able to see your template. So that's a good idea to at least have one subfolder that you can share with the entire consortium. Then you can also share with just your system, and then you can share with just your branch. And I do recommend doing at least the branch level one, so that if you need to share a report or somebody is taking over ownership of a report or something, they can do that easily because it's already been shared, so that they can see it and clone. In this case, I'm just going to go ahead and share with my branch level. And that was maybe you remember, that was what was here by default because it's based on my workstation. So the system and branch that will be available to you will be based on your workstation. If for some reason you wanted to share it with a different branch than the workstation you're logged into, so if you typically work at one branch in your system, but you are creating reports for a different branch, probably the best thing to do there is just to share it at the system level. But if you don't want to do that, you want to share it with a specific branch, you would need to switch to a different workstation at the branch where you want that sharing to occur. Very, very highly specific situation. But if that's something you want to do, just be aware that your workstation sets the availability of different sharing options. So I'm going to go ahead and save this. And so now I have my templates folder. It's shared with people at my branch. I could go ahead and start creating templates or cloning templates into here. I'll do the same with my reports folder, where I'll click on reports. I'll click add top level report folder. It has automatically filled this in with the same folder name that I used for templates. So I'll confirm that. And my little arrow has appeared, so I can click on that, and then I can see the tree open up, and I can open up my subfolder, and then I can do my sharing settings here as well. And just so that you see what that looks like once it's shared, you'll see the level it's shared with in parentheses after the name of the folder. So prior to this, it just said training. Now it says training in parentheses pack because it's been shared. And then I'll do the same thing with my outputs. So now when I come into outputs, you see it does not say a branch afterwards, so it's not shared. I can come in here and share it, and I can actually share at different levels. So I can take this one up and share with the full system. So if I wanted my output to be shared more widely than my template or vice versa, then I can do that. And I can create as many of these subfolders as I need to. So that is the process of creating subfolders and sharing them. It does look like I've got a question here in the chat. Yes. So Robert asked if you need to unshare in order to change the sharing level. I believe that is the case in the new version. Let's take a look. So if I come into this shared subfolder and I wanted to change this to be shared with all of Cardinal, you can see now I don't have the original share button. I just have an unshare. So I would have to click that, and that has automatically made it unshared. So if I come here, there's nothing in parentheses anymore. And now I get my share folder button back, and then I can reset it at the different level. So yeah, that's a good question, because you do have to unshare in order to change the sharing settings. And now for some reason I have two unshare folders. So that's, if I go away and come back into that folder, yeah, I come back to just having one. So that's a little odd, but that's a good question. All right. Any other questions about that process? All right. Well, we're going to go on and talk about the centralized reports templates. But if you do have further questions about setting up folders or sharing or anything like that, please feel free to add them to the chat, and we can always revisit the topic. All right. So for those of you familiar with reports, you may have used the centralized report templates in the past. These are a selection of templates that have been created for anyone in NC Cardinal to use. So we've created them here centrally at the NC Cardinal as part of the NC Cardinal team, and then we've shared them with everyone. So that's something that you know, if you're looking for a new report, going in and trying to find one that's a template that's already been created may be easier for you than trying to create it from scratch yourself. And you can always take those, and when you clone them, edit them. So if you find one that does what you want it to do, but it's missing one display field that you want, then you can, as part of the cloning process, you can simply add that display field into the existing version. The easiest way to kind of browse these is via the knowledge books. So that's in the reports knowledge book in Appendix F. And so you can come in here and you can kind of choose your category and whether or not you want a count or a list. So let's say that I want circulation templates and I want counts. I can click on that, and it's kind of bring me directly to this list of all of the templates that that are in that category. I can see how old they are. Sometimes an older one may not be the best choice, simply because with upgrades and things like that, they don't always translate perfectly. I think for the most part, everything you're going to find in here has been um, kind of polished recently enough that you shouldn't run into that, except for a couple of little things we'll talk about from the most recent upgrade. Um, you can also do a control F within the knowledge book. So let's say you're specifically looking for something that has call number as one of your display fields. So you could search for call number. It's not a great example because we do have 231 of them, or 230 of them. But you can do that, and then you can kind of browse through to see if you can find the one that really meets your needs. So that is one option for navigating these. I will say that the search option within the reporter has improved quite a lot with the upgrade. So if I come into the reporter and I go to search, and I search for call number, and I want that maybe specifically in the description field, then I'm going to get a list of anything that is shared, anything that I've created or that is shared in a way that I can see it and access it, that has this term within its description. And I can kind of, I can click on the date created to see if I can find the most recent ones. I can also search by owner, so I can look for, maybe a specific user that I know has created one that I want, or if I want specifically the centralized reports that are created by admin, then I can kind of use this sort option to go directly to those. I can also sort by the folder, and I think, yeah, there's not a whole lot more that I can add from this gear icon. I can add the template ID, which is mostly useful when you get to the point of troubleshooting, because you can send us that template ID number of something that's not working properly. And that helps us find exactly what template you're working off of to figure out where the issue is. The process of kind of narrowing down what template you're working off of can be, depending on how many templates are named something similar and how many you've attempted, can be a little bit of a process to narrow down. So if you can give us a template ID number, that's always super helpful. So the search function is a little bit better than it was in the previous version. And then you can also, of course, browse from here directly. So if I come into the Browse tab and I come down to the shared folders, under Templates, Admin, Centralized Reports Templates, I get all the same folders that we see here at the top of our appendix. So it's all the same folders that we see up here. They're here as well. And if I expand the trees, then I see that they further subdivide into counts and lists. So I could come in here and I could open up my circulation counts folder and I'll see the same things here. And of course, this is also not only sortable, so I can sort to see the most recent ones first, but it's also filterable. So, if I wanted a circulation template that is a count, not a list, and I want to make sure it has the word call number in it, I could come up here to the description column. I could click on this little tree menu, and then I could choose contains as my operator and search for call number. I do think that capitalization might be an issue with this. Let me double check. Yes, so capitalization will matter. So just be aware of that when you are trying to do a filter in this case, try both a capitalized and a non-capitalized version of the term you're trying to filter on, because that will make a difference. And so then I can find, well, what are all of my circulation reports that are count reports that include call number as basically either a display field or a filter. So a lot more options for kind of navigating and browsing these folders. And of course, this works in any folder, not just our centralized reports template. So if you have somebody else that you work with who has created a lot of folders and you'd like to be able to search, or a lot of templates and you'd like to be able to search those, then you can use the same tools to do that. We do have a chat question. What is the difference between a count and a list? Basically, a list will give you an individual row for each data point. A count will choose one data point and give you a count of that data point. So for example, within circulation reports, a circulation list will have a row for each individual circulation transaction that fits the report. So, if it's all adult fiction that circulated in January 2025, then I will have a row for each circulation transaction that fits that shelving location and that date range. A count would basically say, I want to know how many adult fiction or how many items circulated in January 2025 for each of my shelving locations. So then that output would say adult fiction, 735 circulations. So it would give you, instead of a list of each individual one, it would give you a count of how many of that actually occurred within the parameters you set. And so those are, the process of setting up a count report isn't super tricky in and of itself, but knowing exactly what to put the count on takes some practice. So that's something that we can look at a little bit when we actually dig into a template. Is how to turn something from a list to a count. But we also do have a lot of count reports here in our centralized reports templates that you can clone. All right, so that is the process of kind of navigating through our centralized report template folders. You can see we do have a lot of different categories. So you're pretty much all of the basic categories that you would expect: circulation, hold, item, patron, cataloging. And then we do have billing and payment reports. Those of you who have tried to work with those know that they are not always the most reliable way to get completely understandable information, but we do have some that we recommend you can start with when trying to find information about billing and payments that have happened. Generally speaking, with a billing and payment report, if one of these existing templates does not give you what you need, it's best to just submit a ticket and ask us directly, and we can pull the data for you, because the reporter and the way that billing and payment information is stored in the database doesn't always play nicely with how the reporter pulls things from the database. We do have acquisitions templates for those of you who use acquisitions. And then we do have in-house and non-catalog templates for those of you who use in-house and non-cataloged circulation types. So a lot of different options here. And we do add to these occasionally. So, if we create a new template that we think is going to be widely useful, we'll add it to here. If you ask for a specific template and it's highly specific to your exact needs, and so we decide not to put it in here, then you can usually find it by going in. We'll usually tell you the path to do it, but by going into this templates folder still, and then just finding the account. For example, if Llewellyn's the one who made the report for you, you could probably find it by going into admin dev here, and he'll tell you exactly where to find it within that account. So these all refer to usernames. And then from that username, you can find the different template folders that have been shared with you. Okay. Any questions about those shared templates? Right. Well, let's talk about the next step. Let's say that you have found the template that you want to work with. And so now the process is to get it ready to actually run a report off of. I did mention earlier that we recommend that you don't run reports off of templates owned by other people, that you always clone them into your own account. That is still the case even after the upgrade. Basically, if a different account has run a report off of a template, that original template cannot be deleted, which isn't necessarily a huge deal for many people. But if you are trying to keep things kind of clean, if you make edits, like basically create a new version of an older template and you don't want the older one around anymore, you won't be able to delete it if a different account has run a report off of it. So we just generally recommend that you don't run reports off templates you don't own. So whether that's one of the ones you got from the centralized report template folder, or simply a template somebody else made for you, if somebody else makes you a report, simply clone it into your own account. You don't have to make changes to it. So if you are not comfortable doing that, you don't have to do that. You can just clone and save as is. But you also have the option, if somebody, let's say you found a template that basically does what you need it to do, but you'd like to add or remove some display fields or change the filter slightly, you can do that as part of the cloning process. So that's what we'll talk about next. So as I said, the big difference between creating, or as I said, cloning is really what we ask you to do when it comes to using other templates. You do also have the ability to build templates from scratch. We're not going to get into that today. The process is, for most of it, is very similar to what we'll talk about with cloning. It's just more of it. So when you create something from scratch, you're choosing every display field, you're choosing every filter. And so unless you have really developed some good familiarity with the tables, it can be pretty tricky to figure out exactly where to start and which tables to use and how to link things. Not impossible, and I definitely encourage you to try. You won't break anything by trying. So go in there and play around with it and see what you can come up with. But creating is definitely a much more in-depth and complex process than cloning, even though mechanically it's very similar. Anything that you create will automatically be saved in your account, whatever account you're logged into. So if you're creating something for someone else, they will need to clone it from your account. Cloning allows you to work off of a pre-existing template, but then own your own version of that template. You can edit those if you'd like to, but you don't need to. You can use it exactly as the other person created it and simply clone, save, and then run your reports from that newly saved version. The process is relatively straightforward. So we'll do that together. Let me just make sure I only have my current one open. So let's say that I go into the centralized reports templates and I'm going to run an item report. So I'm going to come down here to my item templates and I'm going to choose account report. You'll notice as you're doing this that the default is always to show 10 reports at a time. You can change that just as you can through most of the other Angular interfaces in Evergreen. Up here, you can just change it, the row number. You can also, what I often do is just change it so that I'm seeing the most recent ones first by clicking date created twice so that this arrow is pointing downwards and then I see the most recent ones. And then as we saw earlier, you can also filter to find something specific. And so I'm actually going to do that. And I'm going to look for a specific one. I want a count report of items by circ modifier, shelving, location, and owning library. So I'm going to look for circ modifier. As I said, capitalization could be a problem here. So let me try it a few different ways. There we go. Yep, this is the exact one I want. So I was able to come to it directly. In order to clone, regardless of whether you're cloning your own template to make edits to it or cloning a template somebody else owns, you can clone by clicking on it and selecting this little box and coming up to the action menu, or by right-clicking and choosing clone template from the menu that pops up there, whichever way you're comfortable with. Just a word of advice, this trips me up constantly. You will find as you start to use the reporter that double clicking gets you straight in to run a report. For some reason, my fingers always want to double click this, even when I'm trying to clone. And so almost every time I accidentally go in and start the process of running a report when all I'm trying to do is clone. That may not be a problem for anyone else, but it certainly is for me. I'm going to do my filter again. So I'm going to select this and I'm going to right click and I'm going to choose clone template. And so this brings me directly into the template itself that I'm creating. And if I come over here to the right, I see my folder tree. So these are my folders. They're the ones that I own on my account. And I'm just going to put this in my training folder here. And I can come up and change this if later I decide, actually, no, I want to put this in my new templates or my testing folder or something like that. I can do that. Once I've saved it, there's a different process for moving it, and I'll show you that in a moment. But while I'm still working within it, I can move it around if I change my mind about where I want to save it. I'm going to save it to training though. I can come up here to my name and I can change the name if I'd like. Whenever you're cloning a report, you'll automatically get this clone notation in parentheses at the end. I usually remove that and then I usually put in something with a version number. So I'll go version 1.1. And then as I come through and make further edits, I may end up with version 1.2, 3, etc. I can also change my description. So I can say, this was cloned from centralized reports templates. So any notations that you need that will make that easier for you to kind of follow the path that you use to create the reports that you're going to end up running, you can do whatever you need to here. If there is an external document where you have more information about this report that you want to link to, you can also put its URL here. So the next thing that I want to do is come down here below this line, and this is where I can actually make edits to my display fields and filters. I cannot change my core source. And that's basically the table that I'm pulling information from. Once a template has been created in the new version of the reporter, I can no longer change the core source, which makes sense because if you changed the core source in the older version, you lost everything anyway. So you were just starting from scratch at that point. So there's not really much point in being able to change the core source. So that's been locked down now. Once a core source has been set, it can't be changed. But the core source is basically the table within the underlying database where all of the data that you'll be pulling for your report is saved. So the item table is where each individual copy of a material within NC Cardinal has a row within this database table, this item table. And so it's, as you can imagine, a very large table. Within those rows, you have different columns for all of the different pieces of information about an item, everything from its barcode to whether or not it's deleted, to whether or not it has age hold protection applied to it. And then of course, things like shelving location and circ modifier, which is what we're looking for in this report. Now, there are things that are not saved in this item table, but that are connected to it. And these are things like circulation data. The item table does not contain circulation data, but you can link to a circulation table that has information about each item's circulation. And so the two tables have a connecting data point, which is the item ID number, but they are not the same table. And so that's what you see down here in this tree. The top item or the top thing on the tree is the table that you're directly pulling from, and everything below it is a table that can link back to that table on some unique data point. And you'll spend, as you get more comfortable with reports, you'll spend a lot of time linking between tables because generally speaking, you need information from more than one table. All right, so if you are cloning a template and you just want to use the template exactly as it was saved in the original form, you don't have to do anything else. You've put in anything that you want with the template name and description. You've chosen the folder where you want to save it, and you just click save. And now you own that template and you can run reports off of it. However, let's say in this particular report that looking at these display fields, I have the owning library, I have the number of items that have this specific circ modifier and this specific shelving location. What if I also wanted to have a call number included? If I did, I can add that display field at this point. So to do that, I'm going to come over here to my item table and I'm going to look at all of the display fields that are available. So these are all of the different categories of data for each row, each item within my larger table. And I do have call number here, but if I look in the parentheses afterwards, it tells me it's a link. That means I need to link out to a different table to get the actual information. If I just include this display field in my report, then the output is going to just have a database ID number for the call number, which is going to be pretty meaningless to me looking at the output. So I don't want to include this one because it says link. Instead, I want to come over here to my table tree and I want to find the call number volume table here. So that's basically what this is telling you to do is look for the table with this name. So I'll come over here, I find that table and I click on it. And when I click on it, I now see every category of data that's available within this table. So for this specific one, since I want the call number to actually show up in my output, I want its label. So I'm going to choose call number label. I could also, instead of saying I want the label, I could say that I want specifically like a prefix or a suffix, and you can see that that's further links. So if I wanted to link out to yet another table from here, I would open up this subtree and then I would find, the prefix or the suffix table within the call number table. So I'm kind of going into subtables at that point. And that is one of the trickier aspects of reports. That's an area that does trip people up a lot. What I would say to you is that the easiest thing to remember is that you just need to check what's in parentheses. And if it says link, then you need to find the matching table name in this list here under the left. And if you ever have problems with that, feel free to submit a ticket and we can help you out with it. But in this case, I've got the call number label and I'm by clicking this little box and checking it, I've now added that to my display fields here. And I can also change the order. So let's say I want the call number label to um, come first, or let's say I actually want the number of items to be my last entry in this table. So I can move those around. I can also change the names of the fields. So basically the label that'll be at the top of my column, I could change that to just say call number, for example. So that's the basic process of editing. In this particular case, the only thing I've edited is a display field. The filters from the original template will function exactly as they did before. However, I want to give one caveat. If you are cloning from an older template, something that was created prior to the last upgrade, whether it is the centralized reports templates or something that was created in-house at your library, check your filters. Most of these bugs have been fixed, but we were seeing right after the upgrade some bugginess in terms of the paths for the filters. And so this is basically, you know, where each of the fields that are being filtered on, where they're being pulled, which table they're being pulled from. That's listed here in this path underneath the name of the filter. Just make sure that it makes sense and look for anything that says required in parentheses. If you see something that says required in parentheses, you can go ahead and finish your clone and run your report. And if it works, great. But if it doesn't, that's the first thing to check. And if that starts to get into some more complicated aspects of reporting, so that's when I'd suggest submitting a ticket, unless you are a real report expert. If you see the word required and then a report fails to run, let us know, because you're basically you're dealing with nullability. And we had a lot of problems with nullability with the upgrade, and I think they've mostly been fixed, but there may still be some lingering issues. So if you see that, just let us know. So you don't need to make any changes when cloning, but I do recommend taking a quick look at your filters and making sure that the things listed here do make sense. Any questions about that? And if some of that sounded a little bit above your head, that's okay. The real takeaway to that is that if you're not sure what's going on with your filters, submit a ticket and we will help you figure it out. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and save this just by clicking the save button. And so now if I come into my templates, excuse me, folder, and I come in here to my training folder, I can click on my date created until the arrow is pointing down, and then I'll see the most recent one here at the top. And that's the one that I created today. And that's exactly the one that I was just working on. So that's the fastest way to get to what I've just worked on. And so at this point, I am ready to run a report off of this template. I'm not going to do that just yet. We're going to talk about a little bit more with templates first, but this is how you would get to it after having saved it. Before we move forward with running, there's one more thing that I wanted to talk about in the context of templates, and that's transforms. Actually, there are a couple more things I want to talk about in the context of templates. The first thing is transforms. Transforms is basically the term we use for the process that determines how data is processed when it's retrieved from the database. The default for all data points is raw data, which means exactly what is saved in the database is what will come out in your output. So if you have raw data on a call number, then the output will be the call number as it's saved in the database. For a call number or a barcode, that's probably all you need. It starts to need transforming primarily when you're dealing with dates, because all dates are saved in the database as a timestamp, which means that if you have circulation transaction dates that you want in your output, the time that the item was scanned for checkout will be saved down to the second in the database. Generally speaking, you don't need that type of granularity. If it's just a list, it may not be a big deal, although it's just might not be very much fun to read because it'll end up being such a long data field. If it's a count, those dates probably do need to be transformed, because if you're looking for a count of all items that circulated on a specific date, but you don't transform that date, then the reporter is actually going to give you a list of all items that were checked out at a specific second. Basically, whatever each individual timestamp will then count as one. And so you're not going to get a count, you're going to get a list. So if you actually want that count, you're probably going to want to transform your date from that timestamp that it's saved as into an actual date format. And that's fairly easy to do. So to do that, we're actually going to come back into that template we were just working on. To do that, I'm going to have to clone it again. So I'm going to come here and I'm going to make this version 1.2. I'm going to save it to the same subfolder. And I can add extra things to my description if that's helpful for me. Then I'm going to come down here to my display fields, and we're going to take a look at, none of these are really great options for a date transform. So I'm going to actually add from the item table. I'm going to choose the active date to this display, to my display fields. I'm going to move this up to the top. And then I'm going to transform it from raw data to date. And so this will allow me to see how many items my library owns in each shelving location for each circ modifier with each call number that were active on specific dates. I'm not sure how useful this report would actually be, but this gives me a chance to kind of show you how the date transform works. So before applying this transform, I would have seen a separate entry for each second, because of course, items are usually not going to be activated down to the exact same second. So, there'd be no count functionality to this at all. But now that I've added active date time as a date, anything on each individual date within the time frame that I set up in my report is going to give me a count for that. So if I had 5 books in adult fiction that were activated on September 23rd, that's going to show up, that the number 5 is going to show up in my output, because the dates are down to just September 23rd rather than the exact time on September 23rd. Does that make sense? I feel like this one starts to make sense once you start working on it, but it's difficult for me to explain. I've got a couple questions in chat. So Deborah asked if it's possible to run a report with stat codes as a filter. It is. We'll take a look at filters in a moment, and I'll make sure to include that one when we do. And then Marie has asked, if you change the field display order, do you need to change the report layout as well? That is a really good question, because this is something that has changed with the upgraded reporter. The old reporter did not have a report layout. It had one order option, and that was the field display order. And whatever you had as your display order was also your sort order. What's useful about this is that now you have 2 different order options. The first is the display order. That is exactly the same as whatever you set here. So if you set your display order within the display field tab, you're fine. You don't need to do anything further. You don't need to come into the report layout. However, if you want your report display order to be different than your sort order, you do need to come into this tab. So basically, your display order is the order of the columns. When you think about the spreadsheet you'll get for your output, the columns from left to right, currently we're going to have owning library as my leftmost column, followed by active date and time. Then the call number, the circ modifier, and the shelving location will be the furthest right column. In the old reporter, that would mean that I would also be sorting in that order, which means essentially I'd be grouping in that order. All items owned by the same library would be together. Then all items activated on the same date and time would be together. All items with the same call number would be together, etc. That mostly worked, but could sometimes be frustrating if you wanted your output to be able to read left to right in a certain way, but you didn't want to group that way. So for example, if you were doing an inventory list and you wanted your leftmost column to be the call number, because that's the order you're going to be actually going out to the shelves and pulling things from, but you wanted things grouped by shelving location, you'd have to put shelving location first in order to group by shelving location. You now have the option of still having call number as your leftmost column and grouping by shelving location, but having the shelving location show up in a different part of the report. So basically what I'm going to do here, I like this display order. I like the order that this is going to give me in my output, but I don't want things grouped by call number. So I'm actually going to take this call number option and I'm going to move it all the way to the bottom. And I'm going to move active date and time up to the second option. So now I'm going to see things by owning library and then the date they were activated and so on. And I'm actually going to move my number of items to the end. And so it's going to show up where owning library is leftmost and number of items is last. Call number is going to be my third column in my output, but nothing is going to be grouped by it. In fact, I'm going to put it at the very end and then truly nothing will be grouped by it. So this will not impact the order that things show up, that the rows show up. It'll only impact my ability to read the report because now call number will be further to the left, so easier to kind of read. Does that make sense? This has been a tricky concept, I think. Once we've run this report, you'll kind of see how the sort order and display order are functioning together. Okay, great. Okay, so let's go ahead. I've now added my date field and transformed it. I've messed around with my sort and display order. So I'm going to save this, and now it's my second version of this one. So that's transforms. There are some other transforms beyond date transforms that can be useful. So you can transform the casing. So, for example, if you wanted to ensure consistent casing across all categories or something like that, you can make everything uppercase or lowercase. You can do a substring. That can be really useful with something like a call number. If if all of your fiction has a call number that starts with FIC and then has the author's last name, and you just want to get that author's last name, you could do a substring. It's a little tricky. I wouldn't recommend doing that as your first attempt at a report, but you can transform to just show a portion of a data field. The first continuous non-space string. This is useful to get just essentially the first word of a multi-word display field. So this would be useful if you just want FIC to show up for your call number. If you just want to see that first string within the call number and not anything that would come after a space, that can be useful. We talked a little bit about count. Count is just a transform that you can apply. Typically, as we did, as has been done in the report we've been working on, you would apply that to an ID number. So if you're doing an item count, you would choose item ID and transform it to a count. If you're doing a circulation count, you would choose circulation ID and transform that to a count. So you would look for whatever you're trying to account. You'd look for that with the word ID as your field. You'd add that as a display field and you'd transform it to a count. Count distinct is very similar, but it allows you to count each individual instance, so each unique instance, rather than if there are duplicates or something like that. And then max and min allow you to choose the first or last or the highest or lowest of something. So this can be really useful if you have display fields that maybe are going to cause duplication. This is very useful. I use it a lot when I'm doing bibliographic record reports. All right, so we talked about sort and display order. The next thing that I wanted to show you within the context of templates are operators. And Deborah, we will talk about operators in the context of recurrence, because that's a really important part of setting up recurrence. So there's a question in the chat about transforms to use to set up your report to recur. Actually, the transform isn't as important there as the operator, and that's what we're going to talk about now. So operators are how two pieces of data can be compared to each other. So the standard one, the default one is equals, which means that when you set up a filter that says, I want to pull all circulation transactions that happened on this date, then what you're really saying is if the circulation date display field matches the date that I set here, if it equals that date, then I want to include that in my output. So that's really what you're doing, is you're saying if this column matches this filter that I'm applying, include it. You also have the ability to do a couple of other things. Contains matching substring is really useful when you're doing call number reports or bibliographic record reports, because you can kind of pull a very specific piece out of a display field and match only that. So like with call numbers, you could say the matching substring of FIC, you're going to pull anything that has a call number with FIC in it. Greater than or equal to allow you to say if the data is the same as this number or bigger than it, then include it in my data. And that's really useful with dates. It's also really useful. We have a lot of people who do like reports where they say, if this has circulated more than 5 times, then I want to include it in the report. So this would be a useful operator for that. Same thing with less than, works the same, but opposite. In list is probably the most common one used besides equals, and that allows you to choose multiple options. So you could say if an item is owned by, and then have a list of libraries that could own it, it allows you to basically pull multiple different options in a single report rather than having to run a separate report for each branch in your system. You could do a single report for all of your branches at once. Not in list is the same but opposite. So basically everything that isn't in the list of things that you choose. Between is very useful for dates. So it's how you can set a date range. And then is null basically means that a field is completely blank. And that's useful in very specific situations. We're not really going to talk about it today. What we're really going to be talking about today is primarily in list, between, and equals. Equals is the default. In list allows you to choose multiple options, and between allows you to set a range. So let's look at that in practice. So once again, I'm going to come into this version that I've just created. I just finished 1.2. I'm now going to create 1.3. So I'm going to clone this. I'm going to change my template name to version 1.3. I'm going to save it to the same folder. And we're going to come into our filters tab. So we haven't really done anything with filters in our previous 2 versions of this template. We're going to go ahead and do some stuff now. You can see our current filters. We have a filter for is deleted. I do recommend including that anytime you have any kind of item report. And we have actually set it to equal false in this case. So that can never be changed in subsequent runnings of the report off of this template. It will always equal false. That just means that none of the items in the output will be deleted. And then we have a filter for owning library. And you can see I've already applied an operator of in list to this filter, which means that when I go to set up my report to run, I'll be able to choose multiple potential owning libraries to filter on. And anytime you're doing any kind of library-based filter, whether it's owning library or circulating library, I definitely recommend changing your operator to in list. All right, so Deborah had a couple of questions about specific filters, so let's go ahead and take a look at those. She wanted to know if it was possible to run a report with stat codes as a filter. It is. So if your library uses StatCats, you can do that. It's been a while since I've done one of those, so give me a moment. So this would be a link situation. That's not something that's stored in the item table itself. So I'm going to scroll down here through my tree and I found StatCat entry maps. I'm guessing, oh no, statistical category entries. That's what I'm going to want. So I'll click on this and that's going to give me over here all of the potential fields that I could include. So I'm going to choose StatCat entry and it looks like this is a link. Now, in some cases with a display field, if something says link, you always want to link out for the display field. For filters, you don't always need to. Um, I'm not going to in this version. Full disclosure, I don't know what this is going to look like. I have not done a StatCat entry report in a long time. So we're going to include this and we're going to see what happens. That's why we do multiple versions. So to include it, I just click the little checkbox. And so now this is showing up as one of my filters. And I'm going to change this to an in list. And this will allow me when I'm setting up the report to run to choose multiple different potential StatCats. And I don't know what that's going to look like. That's the part that I'm not sure about, but we'll find out when we try to run it. So I've gone ahead and added that. And then what transform do you want to use to set up your report to recur? So we are going to talk about recurrence. Recurrence, you don't have to do too much in the template level when preparing for recurrence, with one exception, and that is if you have dates. So let me add, I'm just going to add active date as a filter here. If you are going to have recurrence for a date, you want to avoid transforming it to anything too specific. So like week of year or anything like that, that doesn't translate nicely when doing recurrence. So you pretty much want to keep it at raw data or change it to date, and that's as much as you should transform it. I'm actually going to keep this as raw data, which means timestamps, but I'm going to change my operator to between. When dealing with recurrence, the real thing that you'll have to do to dates happens at the report step, not at the template step. So we'll look at that in a moment, but this is how you would set it up to be able to do what you need to do at the report step, which is that you typically want to keep it at raw data and have an operator of between when you're going to be dealing with recurrence. And we'll look at that in just a moment when we actually set up a recurring report. But at this point, what we've done is we've added a couple of new filters. And for those filters, we have changed one of them to an operator of in list, which means we'll be able to choose multiple different values to use within that filter. And we've chosen a between operator for our date filter, which means that we're basically going to be able to set a start and end date. And then the filter will pull out anything where the active date for the item is between those two dates that we set. So at this point, at the template level, all we're doing is saying, this is the stuff I'm going to want to filter on. We're not defining any of those filters. We're not saying which dates we want. We're not saying which owning libraries we want. We're just saying, I'm going to use owning library as a point to filter on. I'm going to use active date as a point to filter on. The actual definitions of those will come at the report step. All right. Any questions about what we've done here before I save this? This is where it does start to get a little tricky. All right, I'm going to go ahead and save. If you do have questions, though, we can always make version 1.4. So I'm going to click save, and I'm going to come back into my folder, and I'm going to change so that I've got my most recent at the top. And you can see I've got 1.1, 1.2, and 1.3. So it's not overwriting the original versions, it's creating a new one. And once I'm ready to go, we will set it up to run. And that is the next step in our process is running reports. And at this point, we'll also talk about recurrence. I do want to give everybody 5 minutes to stretch, though. Reports is a lot, and your brain probably needs a little bit of a break. So I'm just going to set us a timer for 5 minutes, and we'll come back together at about 11:15. And if you do have questions in the meantime, feel free to go ahead and put them in chat, and we'll address them as soon as we get back. I'm going to pause my recording.